Envision learning about a member of your family spent more than $1 million redecorating a home and not telling anyone about it. That's what Janelle experienced when she discovered Robyn's jaw-dropping $1.2 million redecoration binge. The response? Shock, outrage, and a family divide no one anticipated. And if you thought that was dramatic, hold on to your seat until you hear about the madness that ensued in the Brown family living room. It started with a whisper, so quiet it was almost unnoticed. A fine-tuned tension hanging in the Brown family's estate. Little whispers, barely perceptible, led towards something remarkable. Robyn had been renovating her new house, but the magnitude of it wasn't until Janelle chose to dig a bit deeper. Initially, it was curiosity, the kind that compels you to glimpse receipts or carelessly scan bills. But what Janelle discovered was far from typical spending. It was eye-popping. Marble countertops, gold-trimmed furniture, handcrafted chandeliers, and detailed rugs brought from around the world, it all amounted to something. And when she finally added it up, the figure on the screen left her stomach in a free fall. $1.2 million. The magnitude of it all did not only surprise her, but shook her to her very core. Each dollar had a story, a decision, a choice taken without discussing it with the rest of the household. She glared at the figures, her head whirling with a million questions. How could one spend this much without telling anyone? What was the motive behind it? And what would Kody and the rest of the wives say when they learned about it? Janelle's heart beat quickly as she envisioned the reactions of the family. She saw the faces, eyes going wide, mouths agape, the slight quiver of shock. And yet, there was some part of her that couldn't turn away, that wanted to witness every aspect. Every bill was a snapshot of excess, every expenditure a reminder of the unspoken lines that had been crossed. She could sense the weight of the revelation weighing on her, a collision of frustration, incredulity, and a touch of sadness. Even the smallest things shouted excess. A hand-carved armchair, the immaculate symmetry of a $25,000 chandelier, custom drapes that cascaded like art. And in all that quiet time, Janelle understood this was more than furniture. It was a representation of values, priorities, and decisions not discussed. She could picture the conversations, the strained politeness behind forced smiles, and the unspoken competition that could have been brewing beneath the surface. In all that silence, the home was bigger, more vacant, charged with the tension of unseen conflict. Janelle's brain continued to circle one core question. How would the family react to this truth? Could love and trust recover from such a discovery, or was it the start of a crack that would never fully mend? And as she stared at every detail, she knew that things would never be the same again. The tension didn't linger long. After Janelle told Kody of her finding, the atmosphere in the mansion was tense. Kody's expression was inscrutable at first, but there was a flash in his eyes, a blend of shock and surprise that he made an effort to conceal. The other wives, aware something had changed, started to pick up on the subtle cues, the sharpness of Janelle's tone, the rigidity of Robyn's stance, the silence before someone spoke, as if the walls themselves were breathing quietly, anticipating the blow that would not be long in coming. Robyn's response was cool but removed. She provided rationalizations, tiny excuses for every lavish spending, crafting a vision come true. But she spoke in the air like delicate glass, lovely but easily broken. The other wives looked at each other, a silent dialogue between them. Trust, once strong, now fragile. Janelle couldn't help but catch the smallest things, the slight jerk of Robyn's fingers, the tiny pause before answering, the studied choice of words that seemed to balance each one for defense instead of clarity. Caught in the middle, Kody attempted to keep things calm, his voice a steady foundation amidst rising waves of tension. But the room pulsed with feeling, a combination of outrage, shock, and anger that no diplomacy could suppress. Each overblown object was a metaphor. The chandelier wasn't merely lighting, it was extravagance. The gold-framed mirrors weren't merely decoration. They were declarations of independence and of unrestrained excess. And with each second, the tension seemed to mount, the subtle resentment coalescing into something tangible. Janelle's head spun as she thought about the consequences. Was it just about the money, or was this respect, communication, and that fine line of a family already entangled in so many variables? The answers weren't certain, yet the tension required notice. Each look, each hesitation, each subtle change in tone became part of a greater whole, exposing the magnitude of emotion that money could never quantify. Then, as if the house itself could feel the turmoil, there was silence. In that silence, questions hung suspended, unanswered but unignorable. What would the other wives do when the true extent of the spending was revealed? Could Kody broker peace without choosing sides? And above all, could this family survive a storm generated not by intent, but by decisions with implications far greater than a mere cost? Even as the silence lingered, so did the tension, weighing down each word and look. It was the type of moment in which the mundane became the miraculous, when the humdrum routines of life bumped into revelation, leaving everyone not knowing what was next. And in that held breath, one thing became undeniable. Nothing would ever be the same in the Brown family estate again. The storm that had been quietly brewing finally released. Voices lifted, not in easy chat, but in short, tense bursts that rang through the mansion's grand halls. Every word weighed more, a combination of anger, disbelief, and pain. The wives moved around the argument warily, realizing that even the slightest movement might spark a greater fight. Eyes flashed, jaws clenched, and the air crackled with unstated anger. Each glance, each step, was a statement in itself. Janelle's annoyance was clear. She had learned the truth, but now she had to negotiate the repercussions. She saw the flicker of Robyn's face, an almost unnoticed blend of defensiveness and remorse. It was in the subtle angle of her head, the way the fingers followed the rim of a chair, as if anchoring herself. And yet beneath the measured exterior, the magnitude of the discovery loomed above the room, like a thundercloud poised to break. Each wife reacted differently to the news. Some were speechless, their thoughts scrambling to make sense of the excess spending against the family they believed they knew. Others spoke bitterly, recriminations seeping from words selected with care. Even Kody, the normally placid heart of the family, was left torn between the conflicting emotions swirling around him. He attempted to intervene, to rationalize, to bring back some semblance of order, but the tension was too raw, too close. The lavish details of Robyn's expenditure appeared to gain a new meaning. The sparkling chandelier, the hand-hewn furniture, the exquisite pieces of art, each had become a metaphor, a visual metaphor for decisions that had not been checked, for trust strained and boundaries breached. And for Janelle, each incident made the betrayal stand out all the more, not only financially, but in what it was about: a breakdown in communication, a collision of intent and perception that left the family precariously perched on the brink. But below the escalating tempers and barbed words, there existed a less noisy, more agonized level. The camera captured fleeting micro-slices of time, a furrowed brow, a sigh, a nervously fidgeting hand, unveiling the human fragility beneath the strife. In those small telling motions, the emotional urgency of the moment could not be denied. As voices rose and receded, a question hung in the tense silence: could this family weather the aftermath without leaving scars? Would love endure the collision of priorities, the unvoiced resentments, and the astronomical amount that had set the fire ablaze? And as the tension crackled in the room, one thing was certain: nothing within the walls of the Brown family home would ever be the same again. And the repercussions of this secret had only just started unfolding. The after effects of the showdown lingered long after the shouting had ceased. The room, once cheerful and full of life, was now oppressive, heavy with unspoken feelings. Robyn remained still, her back stiff, fingers locked in front of her as if holding on for support to the storm that had broken out. Each aspect of her extravagant spending, the glittering chandeliers, the highly polished marble tops, the beautifully crafted furniture, now seemed to glare back, mirroring the tension that had shattered the family's tranquility. Janelle, her mind reeling from the magnitude of what she had discovered, seethed with a combination of anger and sadness knotting in her chest. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about limits, about the fine threads of trust slowly unwinding in silence. She could pick out the subtle changes in the other wives, the clenched jaws, the reluctant looks, the way some refused to meet her eye at all. The house, traditionally a haven of family and warmth, had become a room in which each movement, each look, held unwritten charges. Robyn attempted to speak, rationalizing each of the outlandish buys, but the words lingered there, brittle and unbalanced. Her voice was steady, measured, but it did not hold the comfort everyone required. The tidbits she called attention to, the expensive rugs, bespoke furniture, the tailor-made lighting, were intended to express vision, taste, and imagination. To Janelle and the rest, however, they had turned into reminders of imbalance, of unilateral decisions, and of the quiet divide that had emerged between them. Kody's efforts at brokering only highlighted the delicacy of the moment. He spoke in hushed tones, carefully selecting every word, attempting to balance fairness with empathy. But even his peaceful presence could not eliminate the tension that had taken hold. Every look at the lavish home furnishings reminded the family of the decisions that had brought them to this point, and every aspect seemed to possess a silent challenge. How would they proceed now, when the basis of trust had been so profoundly disturbed? And in that hushed, electric instant, introspection consumed. The smallest movements betrayed the burden of emotions that no one could quite put into words. A sigh as someone collapsed into a chair, the smooth run of a hand across the rim of a table, a drawn-out glance at a chandelier now, so much more than ornament. It was a reminder that money, opulence, and aesthetic appeal could never conceal the harder, more tenuous ties of family. Questions hung suspended like dust motes on a beam of sunlight. Could the Brown family come back from this discovery? Would love and loyalty persevere over the conflict between individual need and group trust? And as the silence descended upon the mansion, one inescapable fact remained. This showdown had altered everything, and the future ahead was going to be much more complicated than anyone could have ever conceived. The repercussions of the standoff went far beyond the walls of the mansion. Text messages quietly buzzed in back pockets, covert conversations held significance in covert tones, and rumors started spreading like a slow-moving hurricane. Alliances were forming in secret, no one even noticing at first. Small gestures uncovering loyalties and resentments that had been fermenting for years. The lavish buying had become more than mere ornamentation. It had become a catalyst, bringing out emotions that had never really been dealt with. Janelle sat thinking about the complexities of her family, her realization being that this struggle was never truly about the chandeliers or the furniture. It was a matter of control, of communication, and of the delicate balance of a family with so many interwoven lives. The response of each wife brought out layers of insecurity, pride, and beneath the surface frustration. The unobtrusive body language, the hesitant hold of the eyes a fraction too long, a tapping foot, a fleeting glance at Kody for reassurance, spoke more forcibly than words could. Robyn, on the other hand, navigated the fallout gingerly, attempting to assert herself while avoiding the escalating tension. She understood each move was under the microscope, each phrase analyzed. The $1.2 million splurge had focused attention squarely on a storm she had not seen coming, and though she was calm on the outside, on the inside she grappled with uncertainty, anxiety, and the unspoken question of whether her decisions would irretrievably alter how her family viewed her. Even Kody, whose placid nature had long kept the family afloat, found himself swept up in shifting tides. He brokered, he listened, he attempted to remain neutral, but the insidious undertows of resentment could not be avoided. In the stillness, he observed wives exchange sideways glances, the small tensions of folded arms, pursed lips, and intentional silences evidencing a crack that words could not repair. And in that tense environment, one truth became impossible to deny. The spending binge had uncovered more than fiscal excess. It had revealed vulnerabilities, insecurities, and silent rivalries that had long lain beneath the surface. The Brown clan, with its tangled relationships, suddenly seemed more vulnerable than ever. Each of the luxury items in Robyn's house became a reminder of decisions made without discussion, of limits pushed, and of the fragile web of trust that would now take diligent effort to mend. While the family struggled through the consequences, one question hung in the air, unanswerable. Would love, loyalty, and trust endure the trauma of discovery, or had one moment of excess stretched the family's threads too far apart? In that treacherous stillness, The answer seemed to remain, just out of sight, hovering between discord and reconciliation. The quietly seething tension started to develop into something more serious, something more difficult to tread. Even as the first shock of Robyn's spending binge wore off, the emotional shock waves continued to ripple out. Kody was caught on a tightrope, attempting to balance justice with compassion, all the while subject to the unspoken criticism of each wife. All conversation became infused, all look with meaning, and all motion, no matter how slight, seemed to become amplified in the watchful light of the household. Robyn navigated the house with care, knowing that every move would be taken for something, every statement would propel or calm. She tried to describe the vision, to present the expense as something embraced by a dream fulfilled, but the words didn't find their mark as she intended. Luxury goods, once symbols of refinement and artistry, now bore the weight much greater than just dollars. They were now symbols of disunion, a mirror held up to anxiety, resentment and fears that had been building for years in silence. Janelle, still reeling from the magnitude of what she had learned, felt a tenseness in the emotional core of her. It wasn't frustration or anger, it was disappointment, a painful hurt that trust would be pushed so far. She picked up on every minor nuance, the tremble in Robyn's hands, the flicker of Kody's eyes between them, the slight change in each wife's stance, and it all served to reinforce a truth she couldn't deny. The family dynamic had shifted forever, and moving forward would take more than soothing words or logical explanations. Even mundane moments carried a heavy charge. A vase carelessly left standing, the sparkling countertop, a chandelier throwing sunbeams across the room, each reminded of what had occurred, of decisions made in solitude, of the unspoken lines of communication crossed. And in the quiet hours, introspection gained hold. The family was compelled to face questions long suppressed. What does loyalty actually constitute in a family such as this? Can one ever rebuild trust once it has been broken? And how do you proceed when every decadent detail now bears the burden of history, emotion, and expectation? Amidst it all, quiet friendships forged. Private words, exchanged glances, and minute movements seemed to betray shifting loyalties and simmering tensions just beneath the surface. The house, grand as it was, now seemed smaller, more weighty, as if it were a boat filled not only with belongings but with the emotions of the people who dwelled within. And as the day wore on, one thing became impossible to escape. The consequences of Robyn's $1.2 million shopping binge on home furnishings were only just beginning. Each encounter, each decision, each hesitant glance bore the burden of what had been disclosed. The question lingered, plaguing the family in the dark intervals between dispute. Could they weather this storm, or had the flicker of contention already branded them? The aftermath of the discovery wasn't limited to words or looks. It turned into something concrete when the lavish pieces began to show up. Delivery trucks came up the drive, one after another, dropping off items of furniture, artwork, and accessories that had a price tag as impressive as the family's feelings. The couch with gold trimming, the gigantic chandeliers, the hand-carved tables, each piece appeared to shout its presence, making the house a living, breathing reminder of what had transpired. Janelle observed in silence as the shipments were unpacked, each fresh addition heightening the tension. She saw Robyn's watchful oversight of each installation, her deliberate movements, the way she lingered on details, tweaking a light here, fussing with a fabric there. It was flawless attention to design on the surface, but below it was a performance, an unobtrusive reminder that decisions had been made, extravagant, unabashed, and mostly unexplained. The other wives could not conceal their response. Eyes widened, lips pursed, a hand shot up to a brow. Fleeting, unconscious micro-expressions revealed their emotions. Envy, annoyance, incredulity, and even admiration entwined in intricate patterns. Kody, on the other hand, attempted to keep his cool, but the burden of responsibility fell upon him. Each birth, each placement, appeared to strain his skill at mediating, at reassuring, and at maintaining what little family peace was left. Even the most mundane moments became freighted with significance. A chandelier throwing glittering lights across the room was no longer lovely. It was colossal, nearly accusatory. The flawless balance of a designer rug was no longer ornamentation, it was a pronouncement. Each lavish detail was a narrative, and each narrative had repercussions. And as each of them fell into its place within the house, the mansion itself appeared to reflect the emotional tone of its occupants. Breathtaking yet shattered, resplendent yet weighted down with unspoken tension. Janelle experienced a mix of amazement and anger. It was not just the money, it was what the money stood for. Autonomy, unbridled making of choices, and a single-minded act of personal visioning at odds with the prevailing family order. Even Kody's efforts at brokering could not eliminate the increasing perception that wealth had amplified underlying tensions, surfacing them in a manner nothing else could. And in the stillness between deliveries, contemplation prevailed. Lapses in attention, a finger brushing against the edge of a table, a muted sigh, an absent stare betrayed more than words. The extravagance that filled the rooms also underscored the delicacy of trust, the burden of expectation, and the intricate web of relationships that now required circumspect navigating. The question hung there, looming and unasked. Would the Brown family be able to reconcile love and devotion with decisions that had established such obvious divisions, or had this extravagant show already forever altered their family? And when the final piece was put in place, one certain fact remained. No longer would the mansion itself or the residents within feel the same. Even as the final delivery was set, the aura of the $1.2 million shopping spree still weighed heavily on every room of the mansion. The expensive items now occupying the rooms were more than furniture. They were reminders, each one silently echoing the tension that had developed like an unseen thread woven across the family. Robyn navigated among the new furnishings carefully, her fingers sweeping over the surfaces, adjusting, refining, but always sensing the eyes on her, weighing and judging. Janelle watched her, eyes keen and unyielding. She watched Robyn's careful gestures, observed each tiny detail, her tilted head, the soft breath of contentment, the way her fingers lingered on the gilded edges of a chandelier. It was impossible to ignore the pride that wrapped each movement, and just as impossible to feel the bite of exclusion, of choices without discussion, of trust pushed to its limits in a way that money could only make more grievous. The remaining wives persisted in navigating the tense environment with wary delicacy. They spoke in huddles, looked at each other with meanings that weighed in their eyes, and watched what they said in Robyn's company. Even mundane household gestures, the positioning of a rug, the position of a lamp, became charged with meaning. Each new datum in the house seemed to reverberate with the unvoiced questions now suspended over the family. Why wasn't this addressed? Was it careless or deliberate? And how would the relationships change in reaction to decisions that had seemed so overwhelming? Kody, attempting to calm the room, navigated the spaces with a measured neutrality, but the tension was evident in the tiny micro-expressions on his face. A furrowed brow, a clenched jaw, a second look at an elaborate mirror that now represented both beauty and fragmentation. The opulence of the mansion, which had once been a source of pride, now seemed near suffocating, a tangible reminder of what had been uncovered, a witness to decisions that could not be taken back. And in the still moments, introspection prevailed. Janelle reflected upon the subtle fractures that had developed between them, the quiet realignments of allegiance, and the emotional burden now filling even the most luxurious nooks of the house. Robyn also found herself suspended between achievement and solitude, proud of her dream yet sharply attuned to the strain her extravagance had created. The family was walking a thin line, every move weighed against the intangible scales of trust, respect, and emotional cost. One question loomed above the rest. Could the Brown family go on without allowing this episode to define them, or had the $1.2 million home furnishings binge reformed their dynamic in ways that would never be reversible? The mansion sparkled, beautiful and pristine, but under the glittering finishes, the true story was much more complicated, and answers were still beyond reach. With the passing days, rumors of other secrets started surfacing, subtle initially, nearly unnoticeable, but impossible to miss. The $1.2 million splurge of money had opened a door, and behind it long dormant emotions now overflowed into the open. Small tensions that had been simmering for years finally began to surface, fueled by shock at Robyn's profligacy. Each look, each statement, each precisely weighted gesture took on an added richness. Janelle felt it, those unspoken judgments, those undertows of jealousy, those implicit coalitions forming in the back rooms. She saw how some of the wives hung back a moment longer around her, their faces friendly in a way that said solidarity, and how others silently backed away, not wanting to be seen taking a side. Even Kody, trying to act as a buffer, was stepping carefully, his face serene but burdened with the task of keeping together a family perched on the brink. Robyn, conscious of the attention, stepped carefully through her house. Her pride in the interior design was not to be denied, but there was an undeniable tension underlying every move she made. Every carefully positioned item, every precisely placed chandelier, seemed like both an announcement and a provocation. And as she attempted to wrest control from the situation, the subtle micro-details gave away the heaviness of the fallout. A lingering hand on a golden armrest, a silent exhale, the fleeting flash of uncertainty in her eyes. The house itself thrummed with tension. Luxurious furnishings glowed in sunlight that poured in through vaulting windows, but each reflection, each burnished surface, seemed to whisper the unspoken questions that now held the household in thrall. Could love survive the unspoken fissures that had started spreading? Could trust be re-established once these boundaries had been crossed? And what other secrets lay hidden that would be revealed in the aftermath of this discovery? Even the most subtle gestures were significant. A cup of coffee nervously set down, a calculated hesitation before speaking, a shared glance between two wives, all suggested changing allegiances and unseen resentment. The dynamics of the family were no longer secure. The grandeur of the house now paled alongside the vulnerability of relationships within it. And amidst all that charged tension, one hard truth became obvious. The $1.2 million home decorating spree was more than a moment of extravagance. It was a prism through which all the secret tensions, all the silent resentments, and all the tenuous relationships were intensified. The question hung, heavy and unresolved. How much stress could the Brown family stand before the cracks turned into irreparable fissures? And as the mansion sparkled, the real gravity of the tale rested in the hearts of its residents. The tension had been reduced to a still, stifling beat. Life in the mansion went on as usual. But with every step, every look rested the unseen burden of the new information. Words were measured, careful, as if each one might upset the fragile equilibrium of the household. Even mundane rituals, the pouring of coffee, the setting out of cushions, the crossing of a door, seemed laden with significance. Janelle observed with close attention, taking in every minute detail. The delicate tracing of Robyn's fingers along the lip of a golden armchair, the lingering stare on each chandelier, the quiet breath of satisfaction following the perfect arranging of a room. All were eloquent. These weren't mere poses of pride. They were silent assertions of autonomy, discreet assertions of claim over terrain and choice that had previously been taken as shared. And as Robyn walked with poised grace, Janelle couldn't help but notice the undertone of tension rippling just beneath the surface. The other wives handled it differently. Others retreated a little, saving words and breath, and others ventured cautiously, pushing limits, measuring responses, and assessing the silent unions being forged around them. Kody, however, stayed on as peacemaker, trying to fill the gap with careful calm, but even he could not eliminate the unseen fissures now written across the foundation of their family. Each encounter, each look betrayed how tenuous their togetherness had grown. The mansion itself, decadent and spotless, was a jarring contrast to the chaos of emotion within. Every expensive detail, marble floors, gold leaf mirrors, delicate chandeliers, seemed both a testament to Robyn's imagination and a testament to the rifts that had accrued in its shade. Even an immaculately placed rug was a symbol, a reminder in hushed tones of decisions made in solitude, of trust strained, and of emotions running far more deeply than dollars could buy. In quiet moments, contemplation prevailed. Janelle weighed the burden of old unspoken resentments, the quiet rivalries that had lain smoldering, and the way Robyn's spending had forced them all to face realities they might otherwise have overlooked. Robyn herself had her own internal accounting to do, caught between pride in her vision and the dawning realization of the tension it had created. And as the sun gave way to evening, a question hung in the mansion's still spaces. Could the Brown family ride the emotional residue without allowing resentment to take root? Could trust be rebuilt when decisions had already left an indelible scar? The responses hung in doubt, suspended in the air like dust particles in sunlight, shimmering but vulnerable, much as the very house that had kindled this unrest. The house was subdued now, but the tension hung in every corner like a ghost. Talk had become guarded, hesitant, each phrase thought out for effect, each movement scrutinized for intent. Even the mere act of proceeding down the halls seemed fraught with peril, as if every step would touch off an explosion, every look betray an implicit understanding. The $1.2 million spending spree on home furnishings was no longer an economic shock. It was now a prism through which all the relationships within the family were being viewed. Janelle thought about how tenuous the equilibrium had grown. The subtle changes in the behavior of the other wives, the whispered looks, the controlled tones, the pauses, said it all. Even the smallest, ordinary movements, such as adjusting a pillow or putting down a cup on a table, bore a load that never existed before. Kody navigated it all in his own stoic manner, but the tension was evident in the faint crease on his brow, and the precise impartiality in his tone. He was attempting to mediate, to comfort, but the intensity of the tension established the fact that mediation itself couldn't heal what had been disrupted. Robyn, on her part, walked with dignity, but the impeccable precision of her house now couldn't be separated from the judgment it drew. Each chandelier, each gilded piece of furniture, each delicate detail had been scrutinized not merely for elegance, but as a declaration, an expression of autonomy that had unwittingly caused envy, frustration, and uncertainty. Even as she glided unself-consciously through her surroundings, the brief flashes of uncertainty in her features indicated she realized the tempest she had created, even if she had not expected its full fury. And yet, through the tension, there were times of contemplation. In secluded recesses, Janelle pondered on what lay beneath: the open animosities, the tenuous allegiances, and the ancient forms that had brought this clash into being. Robyn also appeared to grapple with her decisions, knowing the mansion, though lovely, was a platform upon which feelings unfolded as tangibly as the opulence around them. All objects now held double meanings: beauty and segregation, pride and discomfort, aspiration and fallout. The attempts at reconciliation within the family were tentative. Words were spoken with care, gestures muted, but even during the moments of courtesy, the undertone of mistrust remained. The house, glittering and spotless, seemed to mirror the delicacy of the relationships within it. And in that tense air, one fact became impossible to evade: the binge had uncovered more than expenditure. It had uncovered vulnerabilities, resentments, and unspoken tensions which would not evaporate so easily. As the evening drew to a close, one thing remained unanswered in the quiet of the mansion. Could the Brown family really mend the breaks? Or had the $1.2 million interior decorating binge left a rift that would never heal completely? The reply hung in the air: the last of the sunlight on a gleaming chandelier. Beautiful, delicate, and uncertain dot. The house was still quiet, but the tension lingered, hanging in the silences between the words, in the heaviness of the eyes, and in the quiet of the soft footsteps on mirrored floors. Each corner, each elaborate detail, vibrated with the narrative that had transpired, the narrative of trust breached, of boundaries overstepped, and of decisions made with outcomes greater than anyone could have imagined. The $1.2 million spree of home furnishings had left its indelible mark, not only on the house's rooms, but on the hearts of all those residing there. Janelle sat in silence, observing the dynamics of how they had led them here. She could perceive the tiny cracks that had developed, minor changes in behavior, unspoken judgments, and nagging suspicions. Even the smallest actions held meaning now: the brush of a hand against a countertop, the incline of a head, the hesitation before a word was uttered. Every step was a reminder that the dynamics of the family had been irrevocably changed, that love and luxury had crashed in a collision that warranted accountability. Robyn also appeared torn between pride and consciousness. Her house, now finally decked in every decorative item she had dreamed of, was a testament to her sense of taste, determination, and vision. But the absolute beauty of her environment could not suppress the silent tension in the air, the subtle readjustment of relationships, or the unspoken questions. Each one of those shining chandeliers, each golden chair, and each marble countertop had become a symbol of achievement and a mirror, in which the delicate balance of loyalty, respect, and trust was reflected. Kody, in his effort to keep the family intact, navigated with caution through the rooms, knowing that words were not enough to repair what had been discovered. He watched the tender interactions, the micro details, and the underlying currents of feeling, recognizing that the ties of family demanded more than explication. They demanded time, comprehension, and perhaps forgiveness that could not be insisted upon, but only worked for. And in the still, electric moments afterward, the question that had lingered from the start persisted: would the Brown family be able to weather the consequences of such excess without sacrificing the trust, affection, and bonding that had once seemed invincible? Or had this $1.2 million revelation irreparably altered the texture of their relationships? As the mansion sparkled in the warm light, reflecting off polished surfaces and glimmering chandeliers, one thing was certain: the story was not finished yet. And now the question is no longer for them. It's for you. If someone within your own family made decisions that rocked the very core of trust, what would you do? How much would love extend before it would shatter? And how much would it take to mend it? Even after the mansion had fallen silent, the ripple of the $1.2 million splurge lingered, turning inside the Brown family like a subterranean stream. Ordinary life continued, yet it was imbued with the flavor of something that would never again be simple. Each room, each chandelier, each hand-carved table appeared to bear a memory, a tension, an unspoken reminder of decisions that had deflected the family's equilibrium. Janelle walked quietly through the house, taking in not only the furnishings, but the small exchanges that had been imbued with significance. A careless motion, previously harmless, now spoke of loyalty or opposition. Eyes met, and immediately dropped. Words were qualified, silences calculated. Even laughter had an edge, as if the tension of the confrontation had imprinted itself on every social tick, every shared look. Robyn, sensitive to the shadow lingering, kept her smile, but the peaceful flashes of introspection betrayed her. She drew her hand across the rim of a gold-edged table, her fingers skating the patterns she had learned by heart, as her thoughts weighed the price, monetary and emotional. Each adornment she had selected, each indulgent purchase she had made, now meant more than vision. It was a symbol of boundaries, trust, and perception by family, pride blended with uncertainty, success with apprehension, so that a tension had been generated that could hardly be calmed. Kody's role remained critical, yet increasingly complex. He navigated the emotional undercurrents, observing subtle expressions, micro-gestures, and the invisible shifts in loyalty and tension. His calm was tested repeatedly, the weight of responsibility pressing harder as he realized that the family's cohesion now depended on more than conversations or mediations. It required an emotional recalibration that could not be rushed. The house, sparkling and spotless, appeared to draw breath from the tension it harbored. Light danced on well-satinated surfaces, casting illusions of solidity that covered the soft cracks that lay hidden beneath. All the extravagant touches, chandeliers, mirrors, marble floors, reminded that beauty and extravagance could light and separate at the same time, amplifying that which had been there all along beneath the surface. And in those still, introspective moments, the question that had been perched there all along grew louder, more urgent. Could the Brown family really reconcile trust, love, and values in the aftermath of decisions that had shaken their balance? Or had one excess of indulgence exposed deeper fault lines that would never completely mend? The solutions evaded them, hovering in the still tension of the house, biding their time until the family transitioned along the fragile, unsure path that lay before them. One decision, one movement, and one look at a time. The days that succeeded were thick with unspoken tension, as though the house itself had swallowed up the conflict and now bore it silently from place to place. Every morning was started with cautious movements, silent steps, thoughtful gestures, and measured speech to prevent further conflict. The $1.2 million home furnishings binge had turned the house into a place where even mundane moments were charged with significance. Every encounter weighed down with the burden of previous decisions. Janelle observed the minute changes in behavior with acute sensitivity. The tiniest things spoke volumes. A hand resting on a railing, a sidelong look at Kody, an almost imperceptible adjustment of a cushion. The micro moments became messages, speaking frustration, devotion, or wordless rebellion. Each gesture in the house appeared to ripple across the family, an unseen thread linking emotions that were hard to put into words, but impossible to disregard. Robyn walked through the mansion calmly, but the tension was inescapable. She set down a decorative vase on a side table, tinkered with a chandelier, and trailed her fingers along the edges of an armchair. But every move was watched, measured, and silently critiqued. Pride in the home blended with a piercing consciousness of the conflict it had ignited, placing her in a state of liminality, between attainment and alienation, between vision achieved and relationships strained. Kody tried to balance things, acting with measured neutrality, providing words of comfort, and mediating when possible. But he also recognized that the broken trust would not be easily fixed by talking it out. The family had embarked upon a new rhythm, one in which every decision, every utterance, and every look held meaning beyond the moment. Even silence appeared to convey much, mirroring the uncertainty that had descended upon the mansion. The home, opulent and lavish, had become a reflection of the family's emotional state. Every polished surface, every glittering reflection, seemed to enlarge what was always there: competition, insecurities, and the fragile dance of alliances. The rich decor that once represented beauty now also reflected on decisions made in solitude and their consequences. In the stunned, electric silence that followed, there could be no denying one thing: the Brown family would have to deal with more than the apparent fallout of the shopping binge. They would have to deal with the emotional fissures it laid bare, the loyalties it had tested, and the trust that needed to be systematically rebuilt. And as they progressed through the mansion, every step and look was a reminder that certain repercussions, however quiet, might have no time limits, forging the way forward in directions that nobody could yet envisage. The mansion, which had shone and sparkled when it looked best, now seemed like a tension waiting to happen stage set. Every surface, every reflection, every lavish detail bore the burden of unspoken feelings. The $1.2 million spending spree had left its mark well beyond the house itself. It had altered the very cadence of the Brown family. Even mundane actions, pouring coffee, fluffing a pillow, or walking down a hallway, were now filled with significance, charged with the undertows of loyalty, envy, and judgment. Janelle walked through the rooms with eyes that saw everything. Each of Robyn's gestures, each finicky placement of a chandelier, each smoothing of the fabric, each deliberate repositioning of a gold chair, spoke volumes. Pride certainly, but also a sense of the tension she had created. And Janelle, attuned to the invisible webs of feeling, sensed the full impact of what this spending had uncovered. Decisions made independently, trust strained, and relationships quietly realigning under duress. The other wives moved through the mansion in their own manners. Some pulled back, using silence as a barricade, while others calculated every word, every look, every step for effect. Kody, as the glue that held the family together, attempted to broker peace, to calm, to repair some sense of equilibrium. But the rifts exposed by the shopping binge could not be repaired with soothing words. Every contact, no matter how guarded, was a reminder of the underlying subtle seething tension. Robyn herself was at the center of it all, a blend of pride and contemplation in her demeanor. Her dream had been fulfilled, every indulgent aspect precisely as she envisioned. And yet she could not help but see that beauty and extravagance had also brought to light weakness, envy, and broken trust. The manor sparkled, but its walls bore the whispers of questions that needed answering. Might love prevail when choices conflict with shared expectation? Might trust hold after it has been silently tried? And in those still, quiet moments, the family knew something irrefutable. The fallout was not yet done. The house, grand and immaculate, had become an image of their inner lives. Beautiful but broken, sparkling but fragile. Each chandelier, each armchair, each gleaming surface, spoke not just of the tale of prosperity and excess, but of the more fragile, complicated tale of family, devotion and staying power. And so the final question lingers. Not only for the Brown family, but for anyone who watches their tale unfold. When trust is broken and decisions make indelible impressions, how far is love able to reach before it snaps? And if it does bend, can it ever be restored to what it once was? Or will the cracks remain, buried in plain view, like silhouettes in a meticulously decorated chamber?